lecture one, I think, started with showing the redox reaction, and that was where they realized that sometimes when chemicals react, there's a transfer of electrons. And some brilliant guy came up with the idea, what if we could separate those half reactions and force the electrons to have to travel externally from one half reaction to the other, and that way we could go, we could capture those electrons and use them for useful work, thus a battery. All right? So what is going on if the half reactions are together is that we have no useful work. They're just being transferred from solution to the wire. We might generate a little bit of heat if it's exothermic, but big deal. But if we can separate those half reactions, then we force those electrons to have to travel externally. And while they're doing that, we can capture them. They separated from the herd now. All right, and then we can use those electrons for useful work, electrical work, generating electricity, creating a full circuit. And this is what we're going to look at today. Doing this, separating the half reactions into two containers is called a galvanic cell. It's also called a voltaic cell. They might say in a general sense an electrochemical cell. All right, so if you see that, don't freak out. That's not a galvanic cell, All right, so they just are changing the words on you. But what we see with that diagram, and I will show you how to fill it in here in a minute, is by separating the half reactions, we have a little wire the electrons can be transferred to. And where you see that V, that is the voltage where it can measure the actual currency going through, and you guys will learn how to do that later. Or, that could be the point where, like, you put in a little light bulb. You put in a light bulb and then it shines. Okay, so you could use a galvanic cell to light a light bulb if you had a correct connection to generate your iPod or whatever. Okay, but this galvanic cell is what is generating what we use as a source of electrical power. All right, your car battery is another type of a we'll get into that different type cell. But what we do then, let's look at the parts in this diagram shown on your lecture notes, page 5. All right. And we'll use the example that I've shown you. Right here, this is, the copper wire put into a solution of silver nitrate. All right, and then what's happening is the silver is plating out on that copper. As that copper goes into solution as copper 2. And pretty soon this solution will turn real pretty blue. Well, obviously, there's a lot of evidences that are associated with this particular reaction. No, I just put that in. Didn't you see? Get with it.
It's a slow reaction.
No, it's actually pretty quick. All right. So we have this reaction. We have copper solid and silver nitrate in solution. Right, and we have silver solid then that plates out, and the copper 2 that goes into solution. All right? So the first thing that you have to do, and balancing isn't really important in this because you're just trying to see what's oxidized and what's reduced. But the first thing that you're going to do in here is you're going to pull out those half reactions. Right? So you can see, okay, one half reaction is the copper solid going to copper 2+. All right? And the other half reaction is the silver plus going to silver. All right, so those are my two half reactions. Now, we got to figure out which one is oxidized and which one is reduced, correct? Top one is what?
Reduced. Right? Give it a shot.
See what happens when you watch videos on the way to school? All right, well, we go from a 0 to a +2. Remember that we have to balance both mass and charge. So the only thing I can do in balancing charge is by adding electrons to one side or the other. All right? So if we lose electrons, that is oxidation. Remember, Leo says grr. I know, yeah. Well, GRR doesn't really work for that. All right, loss of electrons is oxidation. Okay, the copper lost electrons. Okay, the silver then picked up the electron. Obviously, we'd balance this then before we put together, but this is just for the sake of seeing what is oxidized and what is reduced. All right, so now we're ready to set up our galvanic cell. Okay, and according to your diagram then, you've got this little electrode here and a wire, voltmeter, wire continues, another electrode. Now, both these electrodes are in solution because it's imperative that you have this entire thing in one half cell and this entire thing in another. All right? Now, one of these is called the anode compartment and the other is called the cathode compartment. Oxidation is what occurs in the anode. How do you remember that? They both start with a vowel. Okay? So oxidation is what occurs in the anode. Reduction is what occurs in the cathode. All right? They both start with a consonant. It's an easy way to remember that. Another one is an ox and a red cat. But I always got that confused, and when a red ox and a cat, and I just, just kind of. So whichever way helps you remember that. Now, common convention is to write the anode on this side and the cathode on this side. But what do you suppose the AP exam will do occasionally? Yeah, just to really mess with you, all right? So, remember that one free response we had where it said, what would the ratio of these two, species be? And we were so used to equilibrium expressions that we naturally thought it was product over reactant, and it wasn't. Because they didn't say the equilibrium expression, they said ratio, and
I did one of those on accident, because I picked form B instead of A or whatever, and I did an electro free response, and they actually had a question on there that was from which one is transferred, which is the anode, which is the cathode. They didn't tell you, because one is positive and one is negative.
Yeah,
but
yeah. Now, they phased out you having to label the charge because they figured that was too much for you. Okay. Anyways, but they will want you to say which one of these is in the anode compartment, which one of these is in the cathode. So that's why it's very important that you first start out with a half reaction and correctly identify what is an oxidized and reduced. All right, because once you've done that, then you can correctly place them in the right compartment. Yeah?
Now in the AP exam, for example, if I mislabeled the oxidation dogs, would they, if I mislabeled the cathode and the same?
Yeah, you'd get 1 point for labeling the whole thing correct. And so if you screw that up. However, then, if you did anything with that, any questions further on, they would go by your drawing. So, yeah.
Given that, what if you got one part wrong and then somehow got the next part right?
Then no, I think you got to stick with what you've done. All right?
Stick to your guns. Okay.
All right?
Don't be right. Be yourself.
So if you're going to be wrong, stay wrong, all right? I mean, justify your wrongness.
Be right.
Then you're ready for politics. Oh, anyways. Okay, so now what we're going to do then is this electrode will actually be copper metal. Well, that's because I've identified that this is what's going on in the cathode. All right, so what do I have to have in solution here? I have to have a solution of like copper to nitrate. Because I've got to have these two species in my anode compartment. Always make whatever nitrate. Why do I say nitrate?
Because it's a minus one charge.
Because it's what?
It's a minus one charge with a oxygen.
It's soluble.
Oh, yeah, that.
Is it always soluble?
Yes.
Right, so we know it's never gonna get involved in the reaction. All right, because if we said, oh, I think I'll put copper to phosphate in here, what's gonna happen? It's gonna precipitate down to the bottom. Or it might react with something over here so always in electrochemical cells, just use nitrate. Because it is the go-to anion that is always soluble, that's always acting as a spectator ion. And that -1 charge is also important because it's not going to track things, is it? With that lower charge. So, okay, so this is correctly identifying my anode compartment as what's being oxidized, right? And this is the electrode, the copper and the copper too. So over here then, I'm going to have the silver electrode. So like this is really going to happen in high school, huh?
Yeah.
We just have all these nice plates of silver hanging around. Silver is such a great metal too. It's a shame it's expensive. But and then we're going to have silver nitrate in solution because we need to have this reduction half reaction going on. Okay. Now you need to label how the electrons will flow. And the electrons will always flow from the anode to the cathode. Right? So you need to show a little electron here and an arrow because they want you to be able to show the flow of the electrons.
Is that why batteries run out of life? When all the electrons are doing this?
That's another thing we'll get into a little later. It's actually a different type of cell. I think it's an electrolytic cell. And then it's everything we've done here, we reverse. Yeah.
That's the laugh of someone.
Because everybody's great and fine with this. Yes, I get it. And then we go, guess what? Now we're just turning it around.
You can do speed of reactions with those two, right? Because I know they have, they did a new battery where all they did was they changed what reacts and then what stayed, like instead of two solids reacting in a battery, they have like gel and they put a nickel, you remember?
Yeah.
And now it charges at a significantly higher rate, but it also has more life cycles. Like you
Oh,
can charge
cool.
it again and again and again.
Cool. I'm not aware of that.
Yeah.
Sometimes reading things is actually beneficial, yeah.
This can be, like,
All right, okay, so we got this beautiful flow now. And with this beautiful flow, because we have separated the half reactions, we have forced the electrons to flow externally. We'll explain why they flow later, all right? So let's just pretend like, that's a given. All right, and we know the direction of the flow. Now, obviously, what is going to happen eventually, if this was just kept like this, is that in this cell, we're going to start generating a whole bunch of +2 copper, aren't we? Because what's going on here? Copper is being converted to copper 2+, right? My copper, I'm losing my copper to solution. And in there, the silver is playing out. Right? Sorry. Here you go. Yep. All right. So all of a sudden, we start developing a whole lot of plus. What's going to happen to these electrons? They're going to want to come back. Okay? Because what charge is an electron? So why are we going way over here when, man, we got a boatload of plus charge here? And the same thing's kind of happening over here because what's going on here? This is becoming more and more negative as the positive silver is being drawn out. So if I'm packing in all this negative, why would the electrons be attracted, right? So this galvanic cell, written the way it is going to eventually stall out. Right? However, humans are up for the challenge. We can overcome this. We can do something that will alleviate this buildup of charge problem. And that is by putting in what is called a salt bridge. All right? And this is like, this would be like a gel in here that is a ionic compound that won't be involved in the reaction. So what's always good to use, your go-to is group 1 metal with nitrate, because they're always soluble, they're always spectator ions. So what they do is they have a gel, because if this was liquid, it would obviously just flow right out. They have a gel of this potassium nitrate. Its purpose is to replenish the charge, to keep this thing going. All right, so the cation of the salt bridge will always go to the cathode. That should be easy to remember. Cation to cathode. And because we need to replace that positive charge we're losing, right? The anion will always go to the anode. Did you suppose
They were named after.
that they were named after each other? Do you,
I thought it would sound stupid.
do you suppose there's a correlation between the anode of a cell and the word anion?
No.
Just saying.
Probably not.
Doing
Doing chemistry is probably something completely different.
Yeah, just a coincidence. All right, so this is another thing they will ask you to do. What is the purpose of a salt bridge, and what direction do the ions in a salt bridge flow? And your go-to, if they don't give you one, group 1 metal and nitrate. In solution, whatever, and nitrate. Okay, because you know that's never going to get involved in the reaction. If you use an anion like sulfate, well, that can form or precipitate something and then have another side reaction going on. So this is how a galvanic cell works. You start with a reaction. You determine what is oxidized and reduced. From that, you determine what goes in the anode compartment and the cathode. All right, and labeling what is in the anode, labeling what is in the cathode, the direction the electrons flow, the salt bridge, the purpose of the salt bridge, and the directions the ions of the salt bridge will flow. Yeah.
Is this more than likely going to be on an FRQ?
Oh, yeah. Oh, gosh, yeah. Yes, yes, yes. Perennially, this is a class. This is a classic FRQ. It starts with this. If you can do this, then you probably got half the points in an FRQ. All right? Now, one other thing, because I think it's important to remember, is because we're going to eventually relate this to an equilibrium expression and say, what happens if I dump more of this in? You know, will it, yeah. So it's important that you write the equilibrium expression correctly, because what students usually think is we're going from reactant to product, and that's not the case at all. All right? Because half reactions are both in the reactant and half reactions are both in the product, aren't they? All right, so it's very important that you can look at this and say, if I were to write the equilibrium expression for this, it is the concentration of the product over the concentration of the reactant. All right? Because remember, solids aren't involved in an equilibrium expression. So, you would think, if we're going from reactant to product, you know, this is where people will screw this up. They'll forget this isn't reactant and product. This isn't a reaction going from here. We're so used to saying we go reactant to product. All right, the electrons are going from anode to cathode. Well, all right, you've got to go back to your reaction, and it's the copper 2+ that's actually the product, and the silver plus that's reactant. All right, so I want to enforce that now, so when we get to it, you can say, I'm ready for it. All right? Okay, let me, All right, I'll tell you what, why don't you turn to page 6, get out whiteboards and make a galvanic cell on a whiteboard of the cell on page 6.
What was that? I remember.